Now you are hot. Down in Frank's.
Sorry?
Down in Frank's.
Oh.
There are quite a few people online.
Mhm.
Yeah. 16. Well, good morning, everyone. We have quite a few people we're expecting in here. And so I want to welcome you, and we'll just get started. And as people come in, they can obviously join in the program. So I want to just welcome you on behalf of Partnership for Transparency to this special session. We have with us, I'm looking for our second panelist. She's coming, okay. So we have many participating virtually. So for some guidance, we will be going from 11 to 12:30 Eastern time today. And we have lunch will be provided for those who are here. So please stay for informal discussions afterwards with the panelists. Bathrooms, if you don't know, are around the corner, past the elevators on the right. It's my pleasure to introduce, I was hoping our second panelist would be here, but let me go ahead and introduce our moderator, Vinay. Everyone in this room, I think, already knows Vinay. Vinay is our Chief Technical Advisor at PTF. And to my left here, we have our first panelist, Gilbert Sendugwa, who's the Executive Director for Africa Freedom of Information Center in Uganda, based in Uganda. Come a long way, but thanks. We're really happy to have you here, Gilbert. We also have shortly joining us here at the table, we'll have Nadishani Perera, who is PTF's country representative for Southern Asia, currently in Sri Lanka. And then finally, we have Carolina, who is our executive director for IDIS, a PTF partner in Moldova, who will be joining us remotely as a panelist. So please welcome all three of them, and over to you, Vinay.
Can we switch to my presentation?
Yes.
All right. Well, I just want to give you context for this session, which the objective is learning from our partners. So we'll be learning from their experiences in facilitating public participation. The context is that PTF has started an initiative, which is we are calling Enhancing Public Participation Program. And the next slide, please. The goal of the EPP program, the Enhancing Public Participation Program, is to strengthen public participation in government policies and development policies and programs in developing countries. And this program has three objectives. One objective is to improve implementation and development results. Implementation of the stakeholder engagement, public participation as a means for improving development results and accountability. The second objective is to build a trust and social inclusion, which is very important in the context of the very low public trust in government and institutions, and to enhance accountability and responsiveness. These are the objectives of this EPP program. How are we going to do it? Why it matters? I think the developing countries are facing multiple crises: debt, climate, social, economic, and it is important that they don't forget that putting people first is important. Too often, the economic recovery involves painful policy choices, and the financiers and those who design the reform programs don't pay attention to the people's needs and concerns. When that happens, there is a rising social tension and the reforms get derailed. We have seen it so often that it is important that they should change their focus and put people first and make sure that the social impacts of the policies and programs are properly addressed. And that is why this the principal means for putting people first is enhanced public participation. This is also important because the shrinking civic and democratic space means that the governments are getting more autocratic and are paying less attention to putting people first. They think they can do whatever they want. And I think that the challenge to that comes from the civil society and from public participation in spaces and policies. That is why it is important that enhancing public participation program puts people first and use the untapped opportunities in the international financial institution supported projects. Fortunately, almost all international financial institutions such as IMF, the World Bank, African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, all have public participation policies, which are commonly known as stakeholder engagement policies, citizen engagement policies, CSO engagement policies, but basically all of them are public participation policies. And they put these as conditions to any money they provide. But in practice, the promises and the agreements the governments have, obligations the government have to consult with the public remain, they are not implemented, if at all. If they are implemented, they are totally inadequately implemented. So the focus of the Enhancing Public Participation Program is to focus on these untapped opportunities to promote public participation and thereby create a space in this. Now, we have, next slide, please. This means that there are four key players in the public participation. One is, you will see the four boxes on the screen, the policy and program implementing authorities. These are government implementing agencies which get the funding from international financial institutions. Second are the members of the public. This includes citizens, stakeholders, community-based organizations, civil society organizations, business associations, etc. The third group is civil society organizations, which act as social intermediaries between the government and the public. And the fourth are the international financial institutions. I think if you press the down button, another arrow should appear. There we see. So the first arrow shows that the members of public need to participate in the opportunities created for public participation in the stakeholder engagement plans agreed by the government and project implementing agencies. The civil society organizations can help facilitate that engagement. They can also work with the civil society, with the international financial institutions to ensure that the international financial institutions do their job. And that is next arrow, please. And then the international financial institutions have to put the pressure on the government implementing agencies to implement what they have agreed. And then civil society organizations, the last arrow, can directly work with the government authorities to hold them accountable. So that is the relationship which is at the heart of the EPP Extended Public Participation Program. The presentations today, learning from our partners, from the Gilbert from Africa, our partner from Moldova, and our partner in Sri Lanka, they have engaged with or without PTF, with the government authorities, with international financial institutions, and they know from firsthand what kind of challenges are there when you try to generate response from these organizations. So we want to learn from them, because as we embark on implementing the EPP program, we can be sure that we are going to face similar challenges and experiences. So this is a session to learn from them. There are, next slide, please. This is the last slide I have. So I think what is the strategy? The strategy is to close two gaps which exist in public participation, policies of the government and the stakeholder engagement plans of the international financial institution. Gap number one is that the governments agree on the stakeholder engagement plans which remain on paper, and the actual implementation between the actions, public reporting, the supervision by international financial institutions, and closing the feedback loop. There are gaps between the promises embodied in the published, agreed documents, which are the obligation of the government, legally binding, and the actual practice on the ground. That's gap number one. By closing that gap, you create demonstration possibilities, good practices, comfort level, and some trust, which can then be used to close the second gap, which is the gap between what the governments actually implement in stakeholder engagement plans and what their own ministries and institutions are obligated to do according to their own laws and regulations. Many times, what they actually have on laws and regulations are not implemented in the country itself, and what they actually implement in their own programs, government's own programs, implementing agencies' own programs in water sector or health or others, is less than what they have agreed to do under the World Bank or Asian Development Bank finance projects. So by focusing on actual implementation of the plans, we hope that we can create possibilities for demonstration effect, which can then be used to advocate to improve the country and sector systems. And that is the ultimate goal of the program. And we have been pitching this program, at least in the discussions with the international financial institutions, including African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, and the World Bank. We are finding a lot of receptivity on the parts of the managers that they need this. This is not only at the frontline manager and staff level, but also in the IDA 21 replenishment report, the IDA deputies have put a statement saying they would like CSOs to help improve implementation of stakeholder engagement plans. The chief maker of stakeholder engagement plans in the World Bank, Maninder, and his 400 staff in IFC MEGA, Maninder has publicly said in the meetings, including as recently as 10 days ago in meeting with civil society organizations, that he wants the help of civil society organizations to help improve stakeholder engagement plan implementation. The new citizen and civic engagement indicator by the World Bank, which will be published, they said by annual meeting, but I haven't seen it yet, will have an indicator in which we could see in each country and each project how the implementation of a stakeholder engagement plan is being rated. So we'll be able to mine that data to see where the opportunities to close the gaps are. So with that introduction, we are trying to develop a program with our partners in Moldova, in Africa, in Sri Lanka, to develop proposals for closing these implementation gaps as part of EPP, develop project proposals, and do fundraising together. We are at the starting point of it. We haven't got there yet, but we have at least one project and one funding to start a stakeholder engagement policy-based loans in Sri Lanka. And Nadi will talk about it. It is funded by OSF grant to PTF. So we have started that, and in other places, we are just beginning to start. This complements the advocacy at corporate level that we have been doing for the last 3 years, and which we are continuing. We just submitted an open letter to the president of the World Bank and the board members of the World Bank, which was acknowledged in this executive directors roundtable with the civil society organizations. And the board assured us that they are on top of asking the management why the action is not happening. So we are getting some attention on it, but as you know, it's in the World Bank, it's very long, tedious process. We are already at it for 3 years, but we are at this point where they have 6 promised actions, but are slow and hesitant to take actions on them, although 1 year has passed. That's what our open letter said. This open letter, we didn't do it alone. 300 civil society organizations from around the world signed this open letter from 65 countries. So it has caught the attention of the management and the board. And in the IDA Civil Society Forum last week, on behalf of the management, in a meeting with 100 civil society organizations, Robin Burns was asked by Aki and the managing director, Anshula Kant, to respond to that open letter and our ask. So we are definitely getting attention. Unfortunately, they have not yet fulfilled those promises, but we plan to keep pressure sustained. So we are working on both sides of the coins, do the advocacy at the corporate level and to work with our partners at the country level to really create country level data on the gaps and how we can help close that back and feed it into the two-way process of trying to improve this and launch this program. Whether we will succeed or not, time will test, but at least we have started on this. With that, let me stop here and turn it over to Wayne. Over to you, Wayne. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vinay. We have a two-page summary of the Enhancing Public Participation project that PTF has endeavored that Vinay has outlined sitting out there on the counter, so please feel free to take one with you. Today, we're really looking at having some experience shared from our colleagues who are in the trenches. And specifically, we're looking at the obstacles of constructive engagement with governments. And to that end, I think we're going to start with Carolina, and we have Lars here in our audience, who has been very much a part of the project in Moldova. But I'm going to have Carolina introduce herself, and just please, your slides are already teed up following this, so just go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we can hear from you in terms of specific results you found and recommendations. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Hello, good morning or good evening, everyone. I'm very glad to see here my colleague that we work from 2020 implementing the project. But first of all, maybe a short presentation. My name is Ungureanu, and I am Deputy Director at the Institute for Development and Social Initiative IDIS Viitorul from the Republic of Moldova. And it's a great honor to be here today to share Moldovan experience and how civil society organizations like ours have worked to overcome obstacles to constructive engagement with government institutions. If I may, let me start briefly with who we are. And please, the next slide. IDIS Viitorul is one of Moldova's oldest independent think tank, founded in 1993. We are non-partisan, non-profit, public benefit organization working across three main areas: modernization and Europeanization of the public sector, strengthening a functional market economy, supporting a competitive and inclusive society. Our mission is simply yet ambitious to enhance good governance, economic transparency, and citizen participation. In the recent year, our focus has been on improving integrity and accountability in public procurement, one of the most vulnerable areas of governance, but also one with great potential for impact. Please, the next slide. I would like to share the experience of implementation the project increasing the integrity of public procurement in Moldova that we implemented since 2020, working, of course, in partnership with Partnership for Transparency. This initiative runs until June 2025. And here you can see on the screen the strong ecosystem of civil society monitoring, including our project 4 steps. First phase, inception, capacity, monitoring, and policy dialogue. And of course, there are 4 specific objectives with key output and outcomes. And for the inception phase, we have baseline study, a lot of discussion with all stakeholder analysis, and so on. Related to capacity, we updated the monitoring guide for civil society organization based on Transparency International tools, red flags. And also we provide a lot of training, mentorship for civil society organization journalists in our country. After this capacity, after I kept to conduct monitoring, we proceeded the next objective, procurement procedure are appropriately monitored. And here we have several component, grant program, digital platform, and coalition of monitor. And I will tell you more detail in the next slide. But before this, very shortly, I will mention the next objective is finding a recommendation lead to action, because our proposal and recommendation from civil society organization go to national platform on public procurement. Please, next slide. Here I included in this slide some results from the inception phase and training phase. I already mentioned that was providing training for civil society organization, 24 training session, and was engaged more than 25 civil society organization from different part of the country. But I would like to focus our attention together with PTF, we established the first coalition of monitoring public procurement in Moldova. More than 25 civil society organizations, journalists, experts, an independent monitor. And the mission was to coordinate and amplify civil society organization efforts in public procurement monitoring and dialogue with authorities. And the objective was to increase transparency and accountability, promote efficiency in public spending, reduce corruption risk, and ensure citizens that they receive quality goods and services. In this context, we encourage, our focus was to put together that our voice is heard by stakeholder, and we coordinate and share data, and also we made some advocacy in order to put in place our recommendation. And here you can see some picture from the meetings that was organized by IDIS and PTF during this project. The next slide, please. This is the table from monitoring and evaluation of the project, and you can see different phase indicator, but also the output and the outcome. Of course, we can tell a lot of details, but maybe only some small data I can provide here. Was organized more than 76 mentoring sessions provided for civil society organization. 408 publication was on materials on our web page created, especially for public procurement. And we have 20 NPPP members with key stakeholder, but I will tell about this initiative later. Please, the next slide. And very important component for us was to see the correction, action, and advocacy, how our findings and recommendation results provided during this project was implemented by stakeholders. And I can share with you that IDIS, PTF, and a lot of civil society organization was involved in drafting the new law on public procurement, and a lot of our recommendation was taken into related to law, policy, and procedure adopted or revised afterwards. And of course, maybe here is one number, 208 references in national and local media about the activity produced during our project. Please, the next slide. How we establish formal and informal channel of dialogue. IDIS is engaged in different kind of cooperation. First of all, we participate in some institutionalized mechanism. We participated in working groups, public consultation, advisory councils. For example, participation in public consultation with Ministry of Finance, discussion on the national strategy, component 6, related to public procurement. Also, we organize different bilateral meetings with key stakeholders. Also, when is the case, we do informal communication with reform-minded officials to sustain dialogue, even when reforms slow down. And of course, this dialogue with stakeholder is promoted based on our knowledge, expertise, evaluation, monitoring reports, and our advocacy and our publication. Also, IDIS established formal partnership through Memorandum of Cooperation. In this project, we signed 3 Memorandum of Cooperation with Ministry of Finance, National Agency for Solving Complaints, and Court of Accounts. These agreements institutionalize civil society participation in decision-making and policy review processes. The next one, please, slide. And at the beginning, I mentioned in the last phases on dialogue policy, we created for the first time in the Republic of Moldova, IDIS and PTF, the National Platform for Public Procurement. After bilateral meetings, after discussion, dialogue, we include in this platform Parliamentary Commission on Economy, Budget and Finance, Ministry of Finance, Public Procurement Agency, National Agency for Solving Complaints, Court of Accounts, National Bank of Moldova, and also from Coalition of Monitor, that I tell you before, Free Civil Society Organization is also member in this multi-stakeholder dialogue in order to promote our findings from grant programs. And also we invited here contracting authority and some representative from for economical operators. This is Chamber of Commerce and Industry that represents 2,000 of economical operators. I can tell you that in preparation for the launch of this NPPP, participants proposed around 45 topics for inclusion in the agenda for the next meetings, because the main goal is to ensure a structured dialogue and joint agenda setting for public procurement reform. And here on the right of the slide, you can see the topics that was discussed, number of the meeting, and of course, for each meeting, we as civil society organization prepare analyses, documents, and after each meeting, we send to all members the minutes and the recommendation in order to take into consideration for the reform and for improving the system. The next slide, please. Key lessons or lesson learned from our experience. We can mention that building credibility and trust through analysis, demonstrating policy expertise, professionalism, consistency, and neutrality can help us as civil society organization to be engaged with government. The next lesson is that we need to enhance the capacity and policy expertise of our civil society organization and create this coalition because collective voice can amplify the impact and the government or the stakeholder can produce some reform. Institutionalization dialogue through memorandum of cooperation and platform like NPPP can help us. Also, when we create a different platform, we engage multi-level actor from parliament to local government and civil society organizations. Always we put an accent for ensuring communication and public awareness. And also for us was important and is a good tools, digital transparency tools, like we created this platform pulseacquisiții.medi to increase evidence-based advocacy. And of course, maintain consistency and follow up on commitment. And as I mentioned, we, after each NPPP meeting, we ask different stakeholders competent in the subject that we have discussed to tell us what action they will do in order to improve the situation. Also for us, for IDIS, is important to align our work with international and regional frameworks to promote constructive dialogue and policy coherence, but also we are looking not only international regional framework, but of course we need to be on the same page with national reform and all the legislation and modification that is necessary. And of course, for the in order to have this impact, we try to be very flexible and to apply different strategy with different stakeholders. And we switch from advocacy to cooperation when government are open, or back to watchdog roles when transparency decline, while maintaining principle of independence and integrity. IDIS engages constructively, but remain critical when transparency decline. And of course, we can speak about impact. We enhanced policy dialogue between government and civil society organization, improved transparency mechanism in procurement. We strengthening civil society organization capacity to conduct monitoring and advocacy, and of course establish trust and cooperation frameworks and platforma in order to cooperate and discuss with different participants in this process. If you remember, I mentioned that our project stopped in June, and we are looking forward to find finance in order to sustain or to promote our idea and to sustain, but our action to be sustainable. And also with PTF colleague and we see this, we have different discussion with different international organizations, donors, platforma in order to continue our work. And I can mention that we signed and we started this process 1 or 2 years ago. And after half year of negotiation, application, concept, not full application, I can mention that we managed to continue our work. We signed a cooperation agreement with European Union from September in order to continue the work of the NPPP meeting and the coalition of monitors. And I can share our experience, but this week we organized the next meeting of NPPP, and the previous week we organized the work with civil society or with coalition of monitors. But of course, this is a small project for 1 year. And maybe for us also is important to find support, financial resources in order to work more closely with civil society organization in order, I don't know, to provide sub-grants and to continue to monitoring different contracting authority and different topics. For example, I don't know, public procurement in health sector, or maybe is it necessary to monitor public procurement on works or different other aspect, because there are some difficulty in order to sustain to maintain the activity or civil society organization if we don't have this financial support. But we work hardly in order to find some opportunity in order to cooperate and to work in the next period of time in this sector, and not only. This is my presentation. I hope I was in time. If there are some questions, more details, please feel free to ask, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Carolina. We will do the questions and answers at the end, but thanks very much. Very interesting. I particularly like the focus on informal dialogue as a key part of the success that the IDIS had in Moldova, and engaging a government through even a 4-year process of this project. So thanks very much. We will come back with some specific questions following the other presentations. I think next we will move on to Gilbert Sendugwa, who's from Uganda. And if you could introduce briefly the Africa Freedom of Information Center and share a little bit of your experience in monitoring programs, working with government, particularly, I think you're going to share from Uganda and Zambia, is that correct?
Yeah, thank you very much. And good morning, good afternoon, dear colleagues. So the Africa Freedom of Information Center, or AFIC as we call it, is a network of CSOs working on access to information, transparency, accountability, climate justice, and inclusion agenda across Africa. We have 58 CSO members from 30 African countries. We also have a partnership with the African Union Commission and also observer status with the African Commission on Human Rights. And we use those spaces to advance transparency and accountability issues. Now, when it comes to maybe also about the environment, because it's very important in the context of the subject that we're talking about, civic space, challenges, or civic space is challenged across the many countries where we work and our members work in many different ways. And this takes various forms, whether it is about the regulation and compliance. For example, in Uganda, we have to comply with 17 different mechanisms for us to be able to operate. 17. Funding challenges. Our main donor was suspended and later on closed by government because or suspicion. Okay, officially they say they were funding opposition, but government investigators did not find any evidence that they were funding that. They were funding 85 organizations, CSOs, and government accountability institutions. I should say that this is not limited to Uganda, but in one way or the other, you find CSOs funding different challenges. Some of you will know that 53 accountability CSOs were suspended, and some of them have not, licenses have not been lifted, and also bank accounts, especially ahead of elections of 2020, or some CSOs were blocked, and also in Uganda up to now, there have been break-ins into offices of 38 CSOs, including AFIC members, and all the cases were reported to police, and up to now there has not been, police report on the outcomes of the investigation. So that is the kind of context when it comes to accountability CSOs. So then how do you engage within that environment in order to bring results? Aside maybe 3 challenges and how we have worked around them to make a difference. The first challenge for us and many of our members, but also other CSOs working in the accountability space, is attempts to delegitimize those CSOs and their work by calling them foreign agents, foreign agenda being agents. So one of the things is to align with various African Union instruments and mechanisms. For example, when it comes to access threshold, this is recognized in 9 treaties, and therefore finding space in those treaties and work around and frame issues around them is very critical. But also working with African institutions like the African Union.
Yeah, well, first of all, the earphones didn't seem to be coming through.
Karen, can you kindly mute? Thank you.
So, so that is one of the approaches, aligning with African Union frameworks, African Union institutions, and framing issues around them. Contributing to government reporting, where they state reporting, we always, work with ministries and get our issues so that they are part of the conversation of government. Where we don't agree, then this helps us to get information from within, and then we see how to make shadow reporting. But it's always important that we try and work from within alongside government, so that even when we don't agree with certain issues, we don't want to be seen that a number of times police would say that, for example, journalists are tear gas or beaten, or because when they are protests, they are standing on the side of safe protesters or opposition. So finding safe space is very, very important, an important tactic that we have used. The second issue is situating our work and framing around government policies, around manifestos, commitments of president or ruling party, and indicate that the work we are doing is part and parcel of that commitment. For example, within this work, the president's current manifesto mentions corruption 19 times. So whenever we're starting a coalition, we have to state that, and then we see how to constructively bring issues, because most of the time you find the commitment is there, but then the actions are on the other side. To fight corruption, you need independent CSOs. They have to have a voice. You need independent media. They have to be free to report, and even sometimes they have to highlight where the problem is, even when those involved are very close to power in various forms. So, but then you have to find a way of trying to separate that this is an action of an individual, and government action needs to be there. And then also having strong relationships with the government accountability agencies, the anti-corruption inspectors of government, the procurement regulator, especially accountability committees of parliament. And now in Uganda, we also have the State House Corruption and Corruption Unit. When you organize events, you have to make sure these are part of the conversation, but then be sure that we have strong evidence, which then they are forced to kind of respond to. Some of the time, of course, you find elements of selectivity in their actions, and you have to find a way of shining light on those areas and push them to go also in those spaces. And then also having people on the ground, citizen contract monitors, is very, very important to kind of push away this, rhetoric or foreign agenda. What are citizens saying? What do they feel on the ground? Are they seeing these programs? So this has been part of the strategies that we use to address this challenge. The second challenge around accountability is access to information. Accountability starts with getting official information. Even when we have information, we have access through other ways. We already insist on getting official information. And one of the ways that we have done this is, in addition, of course, to making information requests, but to work with the procurement regulator for proactive disclosure. We did mapping of the government procurement portal and encourage them to realign it to open contracting data standards so that more data is there, like all the procurement entities get registered there, and then data is accessible and then linked. And then through this, we, of course, use it to monitor government contracts. We analyze it for red flags. Are they complying with the disclosure obligations? Are there, this data show evidence of this high risk of corruption? What is the level of competition, like average number of bidders per term? Are there people who always bid and always win? Are they bidding with like in the case where a company bidded in UNRA, Uganda National Road Authority, 51 times and won 39 times, but almost on all those occasions they were bidding with the same bidders in a way that maybe these were fictitious. So getting this kind of evidence, but then when you get it, how do you bring it in ways that you are shining light on the action that needs to be taken? Then building rapport and providing honest communication to the agencies that have to act on this issue, but also quite often going beyond the official, but establishing rapport with the people who head those institutions or someone close to those who head institutions, so that you're always on the same page, or sometimes they have your perspective beyond the official communications that we make. Then the other tactic that we used around access to information was to get PPDA to train CSOs on the procurement laws and how to access information around that. And that was very, very useful. This being done by them so that it comes as official position. And then we have also done a lot of advocacy through World Bank, through the government partnership and other frameworks which the government are part of. We also quite often tactfully get senior government people to say things on our behalf. Of course, most of the time we're not asking them directly to say this, but getting them to say it and then building that message. In Malawi, for example, we influenced the presidential directive on data publication on the portal which COS had built. And then once that was done, then we analyzed that data compliance or to see whether the entities were complying with the presidential directive, and then with the Malawi Human Rights Commission, which ADIS access information, did a public dialogue where we invited this to talk about the results. In a way to take a back seat and then let the government entities that are officially mandated to do that job to be in the front. And then the entities that are doing well, we always try to make sure that we shine lights on the good practices and praise them so that they are examples and we build very strong allies. Now, the third challenge is around the uptake of findings and recommendations from the kind of work that we do. Because most of the time you'll find that, the problem is really not knowing what the problem is, but getting entities work around those issues. So the first thing we have done is to make sure that we are always in a healthy relationship, even when we disagree, but we always make sure that the environment is one of engagement and respect. And number two, we communicate directly to those who can act on the issues that we find. For example, one of the issues when we analyzed procurement data was that in the health sector, we analyzed 20 entities. 6 of them had never published anything on the government procurement portal in 6 years. Overall, less than 1% of the data was published. Comparing the market price they had, the law requires that every government entity does a market survey when they are doing procurement planning, and this price should be put there. So we compared that price with the actual contract price. Within the health sector, we found that government had lost 182 billion in inflated costs. And the recommended time by the regulator of procurement is that procurement process should take 110 days. We found that this was taking 182 days on average for national procurement and 371 days for international bidding. So what do you do with these results? One way is to run to the media and say, things are terrible. So what we did was sit with the regulator and explain these findings and of the need state. We also then sat with the agencies themselves and explained this data. And what the law says, what the practice is, and what they need to do. So that helped us to communicate. And in fact, the regulator said, and even also the permanent secretary of Ministry of Health said, oh, we are glad that you did not go to the papers, you brought these things to us. So again, we take things to those who can act on them. Ensure that every claim is backed by evidence. In this work, for example, we found the existence of companies, different companies with the same physical address, with the same telephone address, and documents originated and received by the entity on similar dates. An issue of fraud. So So bringing this evidence, to them was kind of shocking, the regulator and the procuring entity itself. So we make sure that, evidence is them are backed by evidence. If we have doubts, we will not bring forward that issue until we are sure that it's there. Then the other thing that we have seen is having internal allies in the key entities. You need key meetings with high up, you need information from down. Some of the decisions have to be implemented by people in the middle, even when the leadership agrees. So having a key person you can, call on phone or send WhatsApp anytime, we have seen it as a key thing that is very, very important. And the other thing is to find a way of holding them accountable. Yes, we may not run to the media, or when we go there, we frame things in a particular way, but we have to make sure that, you take action on the things that we raise, or if you don't, at least give us your opinion about them. And one of the things that we do to ensure that that is done is to have meetings to discuss our findings and recommendations one by one. Secondly, we will develop matrix and send this entity of finding, recommendation, and action taken. And we keep sending this from time to time for updates. And also, the way you communicate things is not to disempower. Like you have concern that this recommendation has not taken time. Has taken longer than it should. And sometimes some of them require budget, so they cannot be implemented like immediately. Now, when we are in key spaces, we find a way of communicating this in ways that you will know what we're concerned about, but others may not pick it like that. But what we are doing is put pressure that you should act on this important thing. Some of the critical factors, again, constructively engaging, maintaining a healthy relationship in bringing out this, focusing on the problem, engaging directly with people who have to solve the problem, having the evidence, and also quite often we don't just say do this, but we offer to be part of the solution. One of the ways was to redesign the government procurement portal when they said, okay, we like the recommendations, but we don't have the people capacity and the resources, financial resources to hire a contractor. And then we redesigned the government procurement portal. Of course, we have done disclosure agreements for certain elements of the data which we have faced. Then we minimize surprises, like you don't see something or us talking about a finding in the media before this entity knows what is there. We'll do validation meetings with them and before we make a public statements or whatever. So we have found that helpful in minimizing surprises, not pushing people on the defense, but to try and work with them to get the solution. And then supporting, building support for reforms, convening key meetings, framing messages in ways that mobilizes support. For example, we did a study on the barriers to women's participation in public procurement. And we found that women-owned businesses, in fact, 8.2% of the registered businesses are owned by women, but less than 1% do public procurement, do participate in public procurement for many different reasons. So we needed to, our recommendations, some of them were on policy, they need to change the law and reserve contracts. Others were around enforcing compliance, but also building capacities of the enterprises themselves, and then also the procuring entities. So we needed to engage Ministry of Finance on their behalf so that resources are available. We need to engage Parliament on their behalf. on their behalf, but also the cause that we needed, so that, you know, the law is amended to provide for these kinds of reforms. So we find a way of being part of the solution rather than seeing problems. And then, like I said, helping them celebrate the simple wins that they make so that they demonstrated to go for bigger challenges. Now, some of the results that we see, disclosure has improved tremendously on the government procurement portal, proactive disclosure, so that the need for people to make requests is minimized, because, you know, when you request for information, most of the time you're not going to get it, or it will take longer. And of course, more costly. The other one is follow up on the implementation of our CSO recommendation, not just us, but generally on CSO recommendations. It has improved, and we give a number of examples. The government procurement portal was, for example, modified. In addition to redesigning it to stronger technology, but also linking data, the problem of diversion of contracts or funds was big. For every 5 contracts which we accessed, 4 were not in procurement plans and therefore were not approved. Under the law, that is an offense. So we don't go to the IGG to say, you know, they are criminals all over. But what the regulator did was to adjust the field so that in the procurement cycle, we are not able to proceed unless this contract is in the procurement plan. And that was, I think that was very helpful. And subsequent analysis did not see, we did not see instances of this diversion to that level. Then PPD had signed an MOU with us in 2015 and later on in 2017. Now they have signed with 28 other CSOs building on this and seeing the value CSOs can bring in monitoring public contracts. They have they launched a framework for collaborating with the CSOs in monitoring government contracts. They developed a portal for CSOs to monitor and report complaints. This is an online portal. Now, depending on the complaint or issue, it goes into the inbox of the procuring entity and or the regulator, depending on the issue, and then we are able to take action on that. And then we have been consulted on several policies, again, as a result of this. But one of them actually was a difficult one. This is guidelines on emergency procurement. We had done this analysis that I talked about, and on 18th January 2021, met the permanent secretary to discuss the concerns that we had found. Less than 2 months later, COVID-19 lockdown was announced. And of course, the key actor there was the Ministry of Health. We knew they were going to be passing messages to prevent or manage. But then from the procurement side and the evidence we had, we knew that there was the risk of corruption was very high. I talked about the losses, the inflated costs that we saw and the money government had lost. So we discussed, what do we do? If we shout, then the trust in this ministry may be undermined. So eventually, I had to call the head of regulatory agency, PPDA, quickly and say, there's this problem, there's this report, look at it, the risk is big. So I said, what do you think? Is it possible to have guidelines on emergency procurement, which allow for quick procurement, but then strengthen oversight and transparency around contracts? And the process was initiated, and this guideline came into being. But there are others which have come up and we've been part of. Also, being part of the key spaces, the Ministry of Finance set up what they call the Public Procurement Policy Forum, bringing on board key donors, World Bank, African Development Bank, EU, but also key government agencies, 2 civil society organizations, business. We meet every quarter And every quarter I make a statement on the civil society perspective, and that has helped us to communicate key reforms that we need or concerns that we have. And by and large, they have acted on them, because in 3 months, I have to come back and talk about where things are in respect to previous concerns or issues. The other one is the East Africa Procurement Forum, where again we're invited by PPD, and now we have become a permanent feature of that. And through that also we're able to influence key things, resolutions around the beneficial ownership, around open contracting, around women participation, youth, and people with disability in procurement. And now because that becomes a regional issue rather than a country issue. Then once a resolution comes, then we follow up with individual countries on those. And also, sometimes we approach key government agencies, especially the regulator of public procurement, when we are fundraising for referendum. Before, that would never happen, that you ask and you are given this kind of paper. So thank you so much for listening, and be pleased to take questions or give clarifications.
Thank you very much, Gilbert. Very interesting scenario in Uganda where you have a restricting civil space, and but the efforts to engage constructively with government and maintain those relationships, it seems to have given your organization a level of influence to move towards these types of reforms. So very interesting approach, and recognizing the results came from some very specific tactics to those challenges and those obstacles. So thanks very much. Well, I'm sure we'll come back with any questions. We're gonna wrap up the panel with Nadishani, who is again from Sri Lanka. And Nadi, if you want to kind of introduce yourself, I don't think you have slides, right?
No.
So if you just want to kind of introduce your framework from it and the current context in Sri Lanka, which is kind of in this restoration phase after an economic crisis, and some of the opportunities to work with governments and following the last election especially. So please share with us.
Thank you, Vin. Thank you for this opportunity. So I am currently the Sri Lanka representative and an advisor for PTF. But most of my experience I'm sharing today with regard to how we try to constructively engage with the government, the challenges, etc. Also are from my experience in the last couple of years as the executive director of Transparency International Sri Lankan chapter. So I will share with you the period from post-economic crisis, where we had a sovereign default, and that was 2022. And then, following that, what happened? So that was a critical time for the country, because from a civil society point of view, some of us have been for decades trying to take the message about the importance of governance and anti-corruption for development, trying to make it connect to the ordinary people that their bread and butter would be affected if there is bad governance, because there is that distance, what we call victim distance, when it comes to corruption. But when things became so bad and our country came to a standstill, and we were without utilities, we were without food, we couldn't move because of the economic crisis, I think that was that moment of finally people saying enough is enough, and interestingly making that connection that we always wanted. Use that messaging went to the very ground level that that we are in this crisis, not because it was not like a tsunami or something beyond the control of humans. It is because those whom we entrusted our country, our elected representatives failed us. They mismanaged the economy. They did not govern. They were corrupt, and hence we are suffering. That is why we had the most unprecedented people's uprising in the history of Sri Lanka, which was peaceful, which was led by the youth, which was mobilized through social media, but then everybody started joining. It was mainly in the capital. People were coming from all over, and it lasted for a couple of months where they protested, and the main slogan was, we want a system change, we want to end corruption, we want good governance, and we want accountability for the economic crisis. So the specific demand was that the president steps down. And finally, he had to step down. He was considered a war hero, etc., etc. But then he had to step down because people were persevering. Now, our role at this time, as you can see, was to really continue our messaging, where we actually gave information to the people, the more sort of the policy, the theory behind, what they are more now like an emotional call. So we explained to them how governance feeds into, the whole idea of economic governance, how it's connected to corruption, and what kind of solutions we can bring. So we did public messaging, and of course we were left with the same parliament that has let us down, with a new president who just came from nowhere, not elected, who was again supported by the same parliament. So people were not happy with it. But then we had reached out to the IMF, which came to us with their 17th bailout package. Shamefully 17th. A country which keeps going back to the IMF, obviously without sustainable solutions. So now the government had some money to breathe. The country started moving again. Our objective was to ensure that this government does the reforms that are critical to prevent another disaster like this from happening, and to bring in that kind of sustainable development and change. So that means these reforms have to be the more painful anti-corruption and governance reforms, which the government did not want. It was the same government, the same rogues, absolute criminals were in parliament, without ever being held to account, because law enforcement was pathetically failing. So the institutions were captured. So we were in situation of severe state capture. Basically, that means the executive has captured the parliament. It no longer represented us. The executive has captured the public institutions. It was on, rent seeking. Either they were just, it was based on, you doing whatever the politicians tell you. So we had no place to go other than we still had our court, the Supreme Court. To some extent, they were intimidated openly in media. The president used to stand up in parliament and threaten the judiciary about upcoming laws. But somehow, most of the time, they tried to still be brave and uphold the people. So what we did as civil society, and I understand that they wanted me a lot to tell about, okay, how do you constructively engage? And I come to that. But in a moment like this, the engagement meant, in a way, somewhat confrontational, because there was absolutely no intention. However, we need to be strategic about how do we get the government to do the reforms we want at this make or break juncture. Now we're just coming out of a crisis. So one thing we did was the legal side we went to court. We went to court as one of the key parties seeking accountability for the economic crisis from the Supreme Court. We said there has to be somebody accountable. This is not this is a man-made preventable disaster. And finally, the court held with us, holding the former president, the finance minister, the monetary board of the central bank accountable. And that was terrible for their political agenda, because the message went in all vernacular, so all media to the household and ground level, where they said, see, the court also said that these guys at the top were responsible for this economic crisis. So of course there were threats that came. I was basically targeted because obviously we messed up their political agenda to come back to power. While managing that, we did not want to back off. We didn't care whether we had projects for this or donors for this. We were committed to using this opportunity in the country to somehow make a system change, because this was a unique opportunity. Because the government now had no option but to dance to the tune, sorry to say that, of the international financial institutions that was providing the key money. So we knew that if we got Now, the government is not interested in these reforms, but we knew if we got the IMF to bring as a condition to their money, the bailout, some of these very essential governance reforms, our government will not have an option but to do it. So then it was us and a few other organizations, they work in different sectors, but they are interested in governance. Some of us came together. IMF started consulting the NGOs. About the reform process. We went and we started engaging with them. However, and we were pushing for accountability from them as well and for governance reforms. They were not very, up for it. However, they did say that Asia's first governance diagnostic by the IMF would be for Sri Lanka. So that was a key opportunity. We told them, tell us what's your framework? What would be in your governance diagnosis? They told us a 2018 framework, which was wholly inadequate to capture the level of systemic corruption and state capture in our country. So then we said, look here, do no harm principle. You do this kind of a watered down governance diagnostic that will give like a ticket to our president and others to tick the box and say we did everything while not addressing the root causes of corruption. We pushed them, but they were saying, very sorry, we are a poor institution, we have to stick to our, framework. And we were like, fine. We decided we will do our own governance diagnostic, the civil society governance diagnostic, and we will launch it just before the IMF's one, and we will make such a big sound about it. Advocacy, even not just locally but globally, especially where there are voters are in the IMF like US, we will make a shout so that the IMF will have to look at what we have put in our governance diagnostic and get their one in order, at least bring it up to a level where it's decent enough. So, and we engaged on that, and we informed them, and they were of course very positive. They said, yes, please go ahead. We would like to know what's in your governance diagnostic. We mobilized hundreds of civil society organizations. We first formed a coalition about six organizations led by TISL. Then we decided to get the support of the wider CSO community. And that was another one where you have, I think in a time of crisis, we knew there's no point in one organization doing even a brilliant job. Because like Gilbert was saying, the government can always say, oh, foreign agenda, who listen to one guy? Why would you listen to one? So it has to be all voices, all respected NGO leaders, and other leaders coming together and demanding, which is why the six organizations came together. And then we got the wider organizations. We had to do presentations to them to explain how, like say, a grassroots organization working for women's rights. We explained to them how governance affects their mandate. So that was, and I had people coming to me and saying, that was awesome. We've never looked at it that way. We will fully give you support. We will pause our work and say, first, let's fix governance. So that was awesome. And then we did the governance diagnostic. We engaged Transparency International USA here based in DC. They got us, some of us meetings here with State Department and other, some politicians who have a say, in the whole, voting side of the IMF. We got about articles about our governance diagnostic written on some international media. And when we had a big public high-level launch, we invited the IMF, we invited the necessary government people and CSOs and others and media and gave it publicity. IMF came and sat right in front. And then, of course, the IMF governance diagnostic team has by now started individually meeting the team that's doing the governance diagnostic for civil society. And that team was genuinely interested, went into in-depth discussions with us, and we kept pushing them saying, please, you need to put this critical reform. What's the point? Because we knew that it is their one that will get into the agreement that will bind the government to do the reforms. Our one was there to advocate and push them. And also that with that, get that legitimacy and support of the wider community. So, and I think when finally the IMF governance diagnostic came, it was so much better than that original one they said. And they have also referenced our governance diagnostic in their report saying for further detail, recommendations, please refer the civil society. They brought in a lot of the critical reforms that they were very hesitant at the beginning, that we were able to endorse it. And then we continued this engagement with the IMF mission to now get it as a structural benchmark, the implementation of the governance diagnostic reform, and we were able to get it. They got a reform saying you had to have a government action plan to implement the top 16 reforms in the IMF governance diagnostic. Therefore, finally, Sri Lanka had critical reforms like public procurement reform. We didn't have a law. We didn't have anything published. Now both are there. It would have never come if it didn't come through the IMF as a condition. We had a new anti-corruption law was brought in. Our laws were like decades old. And a new anti-corruption law was introduced, and it strengthened and it brought in new elements like private sector corruption, sexual corruption, and other things, right? Then other laws on beneficial ownership transparency, strengthening public financial management, establishing the independent budget office. These reforms that were like dreams for us were actually got into the agreement. And now the government is implementing, and the tranche they release, the money release is tied up to that. Now, we have to continue pushing that, because it doesn't automatically, it's always like, these are the conditions, all very economic, increase your tax, blah, blah, it's compulsory. These are like nice to have. You're like, no, this should not be like nice to have, because then the government will not do. So that was collective voice becoming such an annoyance to the IMF that they could not ignore us, of course, having the legitimacy, and we always went to the public. So we always brought down all this very technical stuff into simple explanations in our local languages and took it to the people, because the youth were already woken up, right? So this knowledge is what they needed in their own way. Why is procurement important? And we got a new law to recover our stolen assets that are lying all over the world. These were amazing things. There was so much public interest. Of course, a lot of misunderstanding. People thought you can get it done in a few days. We were like, average time is 10 years, but we need to get started, So it was very good. So this is, I think, my strongest example. And of course, thereafter, I told you the new anti-corruption law. Now, we knew we had that expertise to contribute to the government. Now, we heard that they're secretly drafting the new anti-corruption law. Sri Lanka has no established process for public consultation on laws, when coming up with laws. And it's just up to the whims and fancies of the parliamentarians who are, backing a law. So when we heard that they're secretly drafting the anti-corruption law, which we waited, we started sending them letters. And repeatedly, absolutely no response. Then we decided, very sorry, the soft, nice approach isn't working. Very soon they'll bill it. And after that, we have no post-legislative review in Sri Lanka. You can only go to court within 14 days of it being gazetted. So that makes it very difficult, and a court cannot change all things, only what's unconstitutional. So when we decided, TISL issued a press release calling upon the Bribery Commission and the Ministry of Justice to make the working draft of the new anti-corruption law public, and saying it should consult experts. And then there was a reaction. The Minister of Finance reached out and just secretly gave us the draft. We were like, this is not a secret document. Very sorry, but we will be going public with this. And they were like, that's fine, but we are only giving you. So when we put it on our website, we opened a channel for public consultation. We said, you can directly on this email send recommendation, or you want to send it through us, please send it to us. Then we convene a group of anti-corruption experts. We reviewed the bill up to the letter, and we gave feedback. And then the ministry started inviting us for very in detail roundtables. And of course, the legal draftsmen were doing a pathetic job. We ended up drafting sections of the law. This took my entire team months. It was very hard to manage with all the other work we had to do, because it's not our job to draft the law. But we had to do it because they were, but finally, whatever we wanted got into it. And of course, then the next challenge is to get it passed in parliament. So another way we engaged was that we had friendly parliamentarians, friendly as in who believed in the things we believed. So they were able to get us a room in parliament, and we convened an awareness session about the new bill in parliament just before the debate. We would always come up with these policy briefs. So it's like a shortened, form of like, okay, this is the critical, these are the things you want to know, and this is why we think you should vote for it, not against it. So we mainly targeted the opposition that normally opposes everything the government does. We said, this is something you need to support. This stage of the country, we need this reform, and we simplify the law. It was very difficult now for non-lawyers to understand. We simplified, presented in parliament. Then we went public about it. And we did all social media, things about it just to inform the people, and we got this law passed. So after that, again, however, because we have not been able to establish that platform, each law is a struggle. To get into the conversation is a struggle. Sometimes we get in, sometimes they put it in the bill, and we have gone to court many times against the bills. But what I recently heard is that the new library commissioners, they launched their new anti-corruption strategy for the next 5 years. And now the Transparency International has been invited to be in the sort of the steering committee that oversees the implementation of the new anti-corruption action plan for the country, which is good. At least you're in the system now. So these are some of the few things I wanted to, maybe a lot of things. There's a story of OGP, but I don't think I have time. So maybe with the questions I can tell. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nadia. She's not passionate at all about sharing how this. No, I think the important part you emphasized in terms of finding those personalities that you could engage, because not everyone is going to be receptive, right? But strategically working on those and using those as a way of
and then
maintaining
put in the
that.
IMF, it sounds
Maintaining
very
it.
wrong to demand conditionality, imagine that. But what else to do?
Well, thanks all of you, Carolina, Gilbert, and Nadi, for sharing from your specific experiences. It's very different regions of the world, Europe, Southern Asia, and Africa. But common themes you can see have been discussed in terms of some of the challenges of engaging government, but the importance of it in terms of the ultimately having results that the reforms that are necessary and influencing that from civil society. So thanks very much for sharing it. We're going to open up for some questions. We have some time, and then we'll grab some lunch, and you can continue to share and discuss after that. But let's just take a couple of questions. If you are online and you'd like to share a question, please just put it in the chat and we will lift it. I see a hand in the back. Is that a hand or a stretch?
It's a hand.
Okay. Jeff, thank you. Jeff Sendugwa.
Question though, because this time everybody's feeling like, oh, corral can stretch. Well, thank you so much to our guests and the presentations that have been so compelling. We've learned a lot, and we are inspired. I'm inspired by the energy, the vision, the optimism that despite the constraints you have at the national level, you can make change happen. And hopefully with the support of organizations like PTF, we can help you to make that difference. We're very glad that we can count on partners who have such vision, strategy, and so on. So thank you so much for what you do. I have one overarching question that cuts across all three, and one that may be specific to Gilbert. I have many more, but I want to monopolize the floor, take advantage of the mic. The first one is, do each one of you have an explicit strategy for harnessing media in your country, in your work, as a part of how you become effective? Or is media simply incidental to what you do and episodic in the way that you speak to them? I would like just for you to clarify that. The second is to you, Gilbert. One of the things we saw with the open budget survey, for example, of the International Budget Partnership, that the needle of open budgets really started to move when governments saw that it was a competitive, it was a dashboard that showed how countries were performing, and therefore it incentivized better performance. Have you thought of an equivalent around public procurement, especially in Africa? I know that openness of public procurement is sometimes included in the open budget survey itself, but to have a systematic open procurement survey or index that is released regularly, maybe even annually, I'm sure there will be takers for that in terms of financing. But then the governments look at that, it's a dashboard, it's exposed, it's global, and it's discussed at launch every year, and they'll see how they're performing in terms of the integrity of the public procurement system and where they need to work harder to have greater integrity in public procurement. Or does this already exist and I'm just not aware of it? Because I actually do think that it may be an entry point there to a system that has an incentive for governments to do better.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, for the feedback. In respect to the first question, media is very, very important. And it's important, how they frame issues. They can help to the discussion towards reforms, or, it can be like a sensation, big headline passes, people deny or whatever, and then everything is thrown under the carpet. So the strategy we have done is that we have identified key journalists who report on the kinds of issues that we do and trained them on these things and how to interpret that. And so we have a group of journalists who report on these things. This, as it may, each time we come up with a report, we have to have a session with them, interpret the findings, and help them to do messaging around that, make sure the context is maintained. Is it enough? No, I mean, it's not enough. Even in one country, there's a report we did in 5 countries that I made reference to: Ghana, Malawi, Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya. Most recently, we did one on, again, 5 countries: Ethiopia, Rwanda, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. So the recognition is there, and we have tried to create like a base, and then each time we have results, we work with them to make sure that they understand them, they're able to cover them from the point of context. But we have seen that is a very important stakeholder to keep this alive, both in building the accountability, in raising the awareness, but also in following up, some of the issues media plays a critical role. On the second question, it's a very, very important, but I think we are not yet ready for that, because on budget, it is easy to, have things compared what is planned, what is the unit cost, what is this, or is the budget proactive disclosed, is it not disclosed? But for procurement, you're looking at individual entities, even within the same country, things are going. So that's why we were pushing for open contracting, and we have made progress in Uganda, in Nigeria, in Zambia and Malawi. Other countries still ongoing, but I think as we get there now, it is possible now, for example, these countries to compare common elements. In the report we issued, I think it was 2023, you see we're able to compare on the indicator, for example, on how much is lost. Say, okay, in Nigeria, this is this amount. In Uganda, this is this amount. And then on another indicator, for example, we included inclusiveness in terms of the proportion of contracts owned by women-owned businesses, youth-owned businesses, persons with disabilities-owned businesses. And you can see that report, it's a dash, because data on those points is not published. But then that helps to start a conversation to say there's need to publish this data. Why is it not taking place? Their gender segregation is not provided for in this template. So I agree that this index can actually be an important aspect that I think we should invest towards that direction.
Thanks, Green.
Nice.
The follow-up question, but I'll reserve it for now.
Okay.
Make a quick point on the media point.
Sure, go ahead, Nadi.
So media, it's not incidental. It is a very, very targeted stakeholder. That was, it's part of our overall strategy, and we had a communication strategy for the organization. There, when you map the stakeholders, media plays a critical, communication is about getting the message across. So we basically had that objective of identifying the media from mainstream to social media actors, developing relationships with them, negotiating with them to get free space where possible, because paid anyway they do. But what we wanted to get into was to ensure that there's news coverage for our press releases and press conferences. There's news coverage when we fight a case and, something we put out. So that has to go. That's where that, them, being in their agenda. And because at any given point after the economic crisis, there's so much happening in Sri Lanka and so much drama created by the politicians that, people like sensational news. So it's not automatic that the news coverage comes to our serious stuff. The sensational stuff takes this place, and that's what the politicians want, to divert the attention of the people from things. So we were able to do that, and there were a couple of channels that gave us a lot of visibility, and also started inviting us all very, very regularly for their very popular talk shows. These were political talk shows. So, I got plenty of, it was regularly invitations to be, and there will be very important topics. Sometimes they also let us guide them further on the topic. They say, we want to talk about corruption, but can you help us to make it more nuanced? What's the latest thing about corruption? It was awesome. And then you can, after that, use those that clip, and you can make it into pieces and break it and post it on social media. We even engage social media influencers. We actually we paid and got a very, very famous comedians. They're two guys who do very nice episodes, and they get over 1 million views in 2 to 3 days. We paid and got them to develop a story for the message we wanted to give. Of course, it was difficult. It was for them a real classroom. They were but we explained, and they got the concept, developed a funny episode with this was some political finance election. This was our messaging. And when they put it out, they got such a great response and so many comments praising them for thinking about the country. We were we paid them, but we didn't put our logo in the first one. So they got all the praise. But our intent of taking the message to 1 million people. We have 22 million in the country. So, but direct consumption of that entire episode. So we've done it more than once. So they are very important, and I think they should be. And that's how we take our message across, not only to people, but also to the decision makers.
Interesting, the social media influencers to use nowadays. The audiences that they have are quite large, even in comparison to regular
And
news.
not those who might watch news.
Right,
But we need them to know,
and
get them on board.
comedians. Some cultures will listen to comedians. We're gonna go to Carolina to answer the question about media, and then we're at time, so we're gonna break for lunch here, but anyone here can continue to ask questions directly. But let's go to Carolina if you want to respond to Jeff's initial question. That'd be great. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. For us, media partnership is very important also. We have collaboration with national and local media outlets to communicate policy findings and reform messages. And of course, in our coalition of Monitor, we engage not only civil society organizations, but also investigative journalists. And also we promote our messages through press releases and also through social media channels, different one, in order to share news reports, infographic, event highlights. And also we create different instruments in order to promote our messages to the public by newsletter, but we distribute to stakeholders, donors, partners, but also mass media. And of a lot of topics from our press releases, from newsletter, afterwards is published, and they push pressure to stakeholder to take attention to different aspects. But also we invite in the public events and conferences the mass media, and they can see also the dialogue between us, government or international organization. And of course, we work with mass media in order to put pressure on some essential aspect and to keep reform that we promote at civil society organization. And like our guest also mentioned, that we are invited to TV and different channel in order to explain our position and also to promote the topic, for example, related to public procurement. In this context, we ensure communication, but public awareness also through mass media. And also engaging with media helps maintaining public pressure and transparency. But also through mass media, we translate complex issue into citizen-friendly language, increasing both accountability and public trust in civil society work. And also we creating some accessible platforms, such as I mentioned already, public pulseacquisiti.md, where a citizen and mass media can follow and understand the procurement process. This is our collaboration with mass media. And the second question related to different monitoring reports and findings and index in public procurement. We produce a lot of analysis of the sector. We have in the Republic of Moldova electronical system. And until 2 years ago was a BI, where we as civil society organization can extract the data in public procurement. But this is a big issue now for us, for civil society organization, because will be a new electronical system placed in 2027, and we need to wait until this year in order to have maybe some instrument in order to extract the data. But also we cooperate with open contracting, and we monitor the reports of international organization, for example, MAPS report on public procurement. And maybe I can tell that at IDIS Viitorul, a few years ago, we elaborate an index of confidence in public procurement. And we evaluate the perception of citizen economical operator in public procurement, and the findings was very interesting, but unfortunately we don't have the budget, and we are looking to find some donor in order to cover this product that was elaborated by IDIS Viitorul. We have a specific methodology for this analysis, and if you are interested in this indexing confidence in public procurement that we have produced, I can share after this meeting the link with the publication.
Thank you very much, Carolina. We will be sharing these slides from the panelists. So if you are interested, leave your email at the sign-in sheet here. If you're online, leave it in the chat. We'll make sure we send the follow-up with the slides and with the emails of each of the panelists if you want to follow up individually. That's it for today in terms of the online event. Thanks all of you who have joined us remotely, and we thank you for listening in. I didn't see any questions come up on the chat, so we will conclude here at PTF Open GovHub. We were going to have lunch, so we can use the space in here. I think Nadi and Gilbert, Vinay are all available to sit and chat as well. So thanks again, everyone, for your participation today.
Thank you. Have a nice day.
It's still back, yeah, it's wonderful.
Hi, Prem, in the audience.
Yes.
It's been a long time.
Yes.
How are you?
Yes.